Hello, welcome back to Ranch Monarch, and today we'll be reading I, I Don't Like You by Catherine Kroll. Summary. Hazy from anesthetics for an ankle surgery. Will exposes a lot more of his conflicted feelings for Hannibal than he wanted to. I, I, I don't like you. Hannibal froze as the words hit the back of his head, and the dirty scalpel fell from his hands into the sink, disappearing beneath pink foam. Soiled water and soap splattered across his hands and arms, and then he turned towards the double bed on the other side of the room. Yeah, you! A weak, woozy finger pointed straight at him. You! Hazy blue eyes widened. Black pupils stared cloudily but fiercely at him, in a deep frown folded in the forehead beneath bouncy curls. I don't like you! I don't like you! Hannibal froze as the words hit him on the back of the head, and the dirty scalpel fell from his hands into the sink, disappearing beneath the pink foam. Soiled water and soap splattered on his hands and arms as he turned towards the double bed on the other side of the room. Yeah, you! A weak, woozy finger pointed straight at him. You! Hazy blue eyes widened. Black pupils stared cloudily but fiercely at him as a deep frown folded the forehead beneath bouncy curls. I don't like you! Hannibal looked at the man in the bed, waking from his anesthetics and pushing himself up on the mattress in his elbows. Hannibal had carried him there after performing surgery on a fracture in Will's ankle, for which the supplies had involuntarily provided by a hospital 5 villages back, narcotics included. Hannibal smiled softly at the fierce scowl directed at him, as he dried his hands on a towel before moving towards him with the bed. He had been grateful to provide Will with a sedative after 2 weeks of medical procedures without. Their steep fall after the feral fight had damaged both of them considerably, and the man had been forced to bite down on a piece of cloth every time Hannibal had cut into his skin or set a broken bone. Will's pain had been such beautiful fragility, but to heal the fractured ankle, Hannibal had needed drugs. The chances of shock taking his friend would have been too much of a risk. And Hannibal wasn't risking Will. He sat at the edge of the bed and used a flat hand to push Will gently back against the pillow. Setting and reconstructing the bones would take several procedures and time, but tucked away in the safe, secluded space of their comfortable hideaway. Time was plentiful. You always look smug, Will complained groggily as he lay back down on the pillow with drowsy eyes full of accusation. Surviving together had been a silent affair, with Will often retreating to his own conflicted head, their eyes rarely meeting across the table. This was refreshing. Hannibal couldn't help but smile. Will, if that's... He started pleasantly, enjoying the man's name in his mouth, but Will's pink lips pressed together and he shushed him with a hiss. And when you don't look smug, you look at me with those big, smoldery, stupid eyes. He brought his hand up to point at Hannibal again, this time with such vigor he almost hit him square in the face. Hannibal took his hand in his, angling away from his face and lowering it to Will's chest. Do I? He asked as he folded the sheets around Will's torso. The intoxicated babble was something Hannibal knew Will would feel embarrassed about later, and yet he couldn't help feeling his skin sing with the incoherent free words that flowed from Will's mouth. Will looked up at him with those thundering, stormy eyes, as his hands curled around Hannibal's on his chest, keeping him firmly in place. Yes. Do I? Yes, you do. He struggled, squeezing Hannibal's fingers with his own. Hannibal felt his own heart pump blood hard and fast through his artery at the touch of their skin. Other than medical, clinical, practical, they hadn't touched. Hannibal inhaled through his nose as he looked down at Will with a raw and longing tenderness, and Will instantly scoffed at the sight. See that, he said, bringing his left hand to poke right between Hannibal's eyes. That one. Hannibal blinked at the finger on the bridge of his nose before watching it retract. Will stubbornly crossed his arms over his chest, trapping Hannibal's hand tightly in between. You're bad, the man said, as his lips pursed like a stubborn, berating child. A bad person. Those eyes tried to steady on his, and Will firmed his grip on the sheets and Etta says, You kill people. Lots. Drawing out every syllable as if enjoying the way every sound felt on his tongue. And then you eat them. Will's lips tightened and curved down almost comically with disapproval. That's really bad. Hannibal watched the man with affection as he used his free hand to stroke a loose curl from Will's forehead, careful to avoid the stitching on his cheek. So there. Will smacked his lips and, startling himself, blinked rapidly at the sound. I can't like you. Simultaneously with the spoken words, Will pushed his head further into Hannibal's touch and closed his eyes, content, like a nuzzling animal. Hannibal felt his throat thicken at the sight. So real beneath his hand, yet so far from reality. He hummed gently at the sight and the sensation, causing Will to huff at those hazy blue eyes opened beneath fluttering dark lashes. Everybody thinks you're so smart. He suddenly trailed, squeezing Hannibal's hand tighter against his chest by clenching his arms. And so talented and good-looking and pretty. Hannibal watched the man's attempt to roll his eyes as Will openly grunted in frustration. People talked about you when you were in prison. He scoffed. A little drool shimmered in the corner of his mouth. I saw you on the TV. I saw you in the papers. Hannibal felt the skin of Will's cheek soft and warm against his fingers. He watched him flash his eyes to the ceiling. I saw you everywhere, Will breathed, his mouth opening in a perfect O as his jaw hung slack. And they were all just eating you up. There was a pause and a blink before Will threw his head back and let out a wet, unexpected giggle. Hannibal watched him as Will laughed, freely and raw, one tear leaking from his eyelids. Eating you up, Hannibal heard him murmur between hiccups, and his smile stretched and grew into pure adoration as he watched Will's head roll against the pillow. The tear dried as Will calmed, stretched his legs further on the mattress, and cradled Hannibal's hand against his slowing chest. But no, he said as he tried to bring his eyes back to Hannibal's. They don't know you. The gaze connected, nearly steady as Will's slurred words that tightened Hannibal's skin beneath the slacks and sweater. I know you. Hannibal swallowed, his breath tighter in his throat. Then his hand curled around Will's fingers. He looked at Will, and Will looked back. A rare sight these days. You do, he said, the words a gentle breath. Will grunted, more like a growling dog than a human, before he closed his eyes again. Only I know you, he murmured, before allowing his head to fall to the side. And as Will slept, Hannibal's hand stayed safely in his grip, and Hannibal felt his heart thump beneath the skin, steady. Will didn't wake until the setting sun, and grunted in displeasure as he sat up against a pillow Hannibal had placed in his back. Drink this, Hannibal said, as he handed him a cup of weak herbal tea, one that soothes the stomach and eases the aches. Ugh, Will groaned, as he curled weak hands around the cup. Thanks. The covers were folded back as Hannibal silently inspected the bandaging around Will's ankle, and felt blue eyes following him to the other side of the bed. "Did the surgery go as planned?" Will asked, blowing on his tea as Hannibal covered the lower body with the sheets again. His voice was rough and dry. "It did," Hannibal said, feeling bold enough to take a seat on the edge of the bed again. Will's cup froze midway to his mouth, and he looked up in bangs through mild exhaustion. He looked the young man with exhaustion, yet younger with the bright flush of life Hannibal had seen there only recently, hidden well beneath the confliction, the guilt, and the fear. "If we can stave off affection, it will heal nicely." Will's lashes fluttered nervously as he looked down at his cup. The first sips stripped the roughness from his voice. "I guess I am very lucky to be on the run with an actual surgeon." He spoke with pained amusement as he drank slow sips of his herbal tea, allowing it to soothe him. Hannibal chuckled as he rose from his head. "And yet you do not like me," he teased, tilting the one corner of his mouth as he watched Will's eyes widen over the cup. He started, blinking rapidly over his tea, and Hannibal chuckled again as he made his way out the door. The second surgery on Will's ankle was equally successful, but as Hannibal carried him from the operating table to the bed, Will had already begun to stir in his arms. Hannibal lowered him gently to the mattress, and Will watched the man's head roll to the side on the pillow. "Will," he asked, cupping rough stubbles with his hand. "Will, are you in pain?" Will's lids shifted with the movement of his eyes before he cracked them open and squinted against the light. "Nah," he hummed, slowly bringing his hands to flex his fingers as if the movement brought him some sort of confirmation. "Nah pain." Hannibal was relieved to see a small smile play around Will's open lips, but when startled, the man suddenly started pushing himself upright and placing his hands on the mattress. "Lie down, Will," he warned. He placed a flat hand on Will's sternum. "Take it easy now." The man gave way under his touch like a boat on water, but both hands grasped Hannibal's fingers in protest. "Don't touch me," he slurred, as he held on tight to Hannibal's hand. His eyes were stormy clouds with bright lightning and thunder. "Don't you touch me." He cradled Hannibal's hand against his throat, where Hannibal could feel the blood pumping beneath the tender skin. A most vulnerable feeling. A most tender witnessing of Will's precious, precious life. You want to touch me?" Will slurred drunkenly at him, and Hannibal had to restrain himself from brushing his fingers over the tendons that moved beneath Will's flesh. "Yes, I do," he confessed gently, and watched as Will bared his teeth at him. "I know you want to touch me," Will slurred. His cheeks were flushed, his voice heated, and his lips opened wide around every word. "But you..." Two index fingers flipped open from grasping fists. "You never touch me." Lashes fluttered, Will's nails clawed at his skin, prattling on. You never touch me," he rambled, puzzling with words as he clung hard to Hannibal's hand. Me! You never touch me." Hannibal didn't pull away from the stinging, firm touch on his hand, and surrendered to the longing that blossomed fresh yet familiar from beneath his own flesh. Will had never asked for his touch. Will had never answered to his longing. "Do you want me to touch you, Will?" he asked, his voice nearly a whisper as his hands opened wider against Will's skin. Will's breathing came out in short, throaty huffs, and his eyes stoked up and down Hannibal's face as he sighed. "You like me." Hannibal watched him, saw him, and knew the man saw him in return. It was only Will he could see through the veil and without, and find the exact same man on the other side. His feeling might be inconvenient, his emotions unfiltered, and yet so irrevocably true for both man and beast when it came to Will Graham. "I do," he admitted, and he felt his chest tighten with fear when Will released his hand from his grip. On one side of his thumb shone pink half-circles of blunt fingernails. But his dread was replaced by weakening desire when Will pushed against his hand with a daring challenge. "Touch me," he said, his drunken tongue rolling freely around the words. Hannibal looked at him, watched the flushed spots high on the other man's cheeks, and licked his own dry lips wet, and then he pushed a hand and stroked it through the soft, warm curls on top of Will's head. A caress, a gentle, loving pet. It was all he could afford, yet more than he had expected. Will closed his eyes into the ministrations against the skin of his scalp. Yeah. He sighed into the contact. I like it when you touch me." The man hummed in pleasure, and Hannibal watched his face relax under his fingers. "Don't stop. Ever again." It was a sweet plea and a command, and Hannibal felt the soft hair grace his skin and the warmth and life that might set his own skin alight. "So you do like me?" He laughed softly, feeling joy grow like a balloon in his belly. He watched Will settle deeper into his pillow. Will's eyes opened at the words. "Nuh-uh," he said, shaking his head and rubbing Hannibal's fingers along his scalp with the movement. He blinked, a little less than 30 times over, before those stormy eyes found their way to settle back on Hannibal. "Not supposed to," he said, folding his chin on his chest as he reached one unsteady hand out to stroke broadly over Hannibal's face. "Not supposed to like you, Hannibal." Hannibal felt the sloppy fingers exploring his forehead. "Says who?" Will blew air through his lips, making them vibrate with the movement. "Me," he said as he poked Hannibal's cheekbones with his fingernails. "And Jack." And a fingernail caught Hannibal's nostril. "And Maui, la la na, and dead Abigail." Hannibal allowed the gentle assault on his face, and he looked down at the sweet, wounded man that was his only living family. One finger came to rest on the tip of his nose, pressing lightly against the curve. "But I do." Will's eyes were glowing when his lips curled over straight teeth. "I do like you." Hannibal's hand never stopped stroking through the messy mop of curls. "I like you too." Will was slurping soup through chapped lips as Hannibal sat down in front of his own steaming bowl at the other end of the table. The other man didn't look up to meet his eyes, as Hannibal picked the spoon and dipped it into the clear yellow broth, perfectly balanced chicken soup to ease Will's stomach and lift his strength. 3 bites in, he dared to try. "Do you have any memory of our conversation after your surgery yesterday?" Will's eyes finally met his, only briefly, before sinking back into his half-empty bowl. Pink brushed his cheeks as he nodded to reply with a tense no. Hannibal's lips twitched. Will was too tired and wounded to hide from him, and yet he tried. "Nothing?" he probed, enjoying the way Will's ears heated beneath the silk of his hair. Stormy eyes shot back up, with fire this time, as Will licked the salty moisture off his lips. "Nothing I care to remember," he gritted, but he didn't hide his eyes this time when Hannibal rose an eyebrow with playful intrigue. "There's no need for embarrassment, Will," he said, blowing gently on the spoonful of soup. "It might very well have been the most honest conversation we have ever shared." Will snorted, soup spilling from his mouth as his shoulders dipped and his eyes flared. "Oh, please," he scoffed, but twitched regardless before he hid them in his napkin. A shocked foot nudged Hannibal's ankle pushingly beneath the table, and Hannibal's heart fluttered at the unexpected touch. "Of all the time and deeds between us make this irrevocably complicated, Hannibal," Will said, lowering the piece of cloth, his hidden smile turning coy with the confession. The napkin landed on the table, crumpled up like a ball. "But I do like you." Hannibal felt his blood pump up from his neck. behind his ear, seeping into the curve of his cheeks. Will's eyes were clear this time, and the pained amusement was lightened with something soft, steady on Hannibal over the table, like they hadn't been in a long, long while. Hannibal allowed his own lips to fall into a real, warm smile as he placed his spoon back onto the table. Just as you like my fingers in your hair. Tilting his head with obvious intent. Only after Will had fallen into a deep slumber had Hannibal allowed him to withdraw his touch from his scalp. He hadn't. Will snorted, the air rose from his mouth as the spoon fell into the empty bowl. The sound of metal against clay was a clear ringing in the small kitchen. He folded his arms over his chest and pressed his lips in together with that what seemed to be exhausted mirth. "Don't push it," he said. He bit, stars in his eyes and pink on his cheeks. The third procedure was the last Hannibal needed to do on Will's ankle. If it would heal as planned, as well as could receive proper exercise, Will would walk without a limp within the next 3 to 6 months. The surgery had been completed quickly and without complication, but this time, upon waking, Will had been restless and anxious. Whimpers had left his pale lips as they clung to Hannibal, bent over the bed as he tried to lay him down. "It's okay, Will." Hannibal had shushed him when those blue eyes opened wide. "You're all right." "Hannibal," Will had croaked, as he pulled the man closer with grabbing, frightened hands. Hannibal had rested his forehead against Will's temple, and his fingers stroked his hair with the same familiar place as they did before. It was the only liberty he dared to take. "Yes, I'm here," he soothed, allowing Will to grasp the lapels of his jacket. "You're here, with me." Will blinked, breathing heavily through his mouth, before he released Hannibal's jacket with contracting fingers. The panic melted from his eyes as they scanned through the room. "Yes, I'm here," he said, a heavy but pleasant daze setting over his features. "Yes, here." He sagged back against the pillow, as his eyes full of dreams now grazed Hannibal with gentle clouds. Relief. "I'm here," he mused, fingers coming up to touch his own face. "Here with you." Hannibal watched him with love in his heart as he brushed his hand over Will's forehead. Damp, but not too hot. "You're here with me," he sighed, and Will sighed too. There was a smile on his face, contentment, a peace that Hannibal had only seen twice in the man. The pleasure shared when dining on Ortones and after their battle with the dragon. Will was smiling, staring up at the ceiling, when suddenly dark sturdiness crept over his features. "Ew." Hands suddenly swatted at Hannibal's torso as Will tried to sit up straighter. "Ew," he growled again, pawing at Hannibal's shirt. "You'll leave me." Hannibal's attempt to grasp his flailing hands failed when Will pulled himself loose. You'll leave me here." His tone was sharp from his doubling tongue, and his brow was low with accusation. Hannibal pulled back from angry hands, sitting up on the side of the bed as he tried to calm Will with his words. "I'm not leaving you, Will," he promised wholeheartedly as he rested one hand on Will's covered stomach. "I'm staying right here." Beneath the sheets, Will's leg tried to kick off his touch. "You coward," he slurred. Hannibal shifted his hand down on the kicking leg. If the other would join, the stitches on his ankle could easily tear. "You liar." "I'm not leaving you, Will." Hannibal shushed, trying to speak calm and patiently rather than let his own passion and pain breathe on the fire that was apparently one of Will's deeply founded worries. "Look at me," he ordered the unsteady eyes on him as he curled around Will's upper arm, carefully directed grounding. "I am not leaving you." Will's arm slipped from his grip again and dropped himself back against the pillow with an unceremonious pop. His head thudded lightly against the headboard, and Hannibal winced as he reached behind the man and pulled the pillow firmly into place. "Not Pa," he sued, as he watched Will stare back at him with eyes more boy than man. "I'm telling you the truth." His hand folded on top of Will's sheets, who tried out his fingers stiffly against Hannibal's skin. "Nah, I don't trust you." One corner of Hannibal's mouth twitched, a weird pull of amused regret. "As long as you believe I'm not leaving you." He stroked and tightened his hand on Will's hand. Will's eyes lowered to where they touched. "Ever?" he hummed. Ever. His tongue rolled over the words repeatedly, and Hannibal could only smile as he watched Will's cheek play with new shades of pink. "Unless you ask me to go," he said, enjoying the way Will's fingers danced against his hand. "No," Will moaned lazily. "No, but you..." His free hands came back with that finger, this time hooked on Hannibal's collar. You're not gonna put me anywhere?" Hannibal allowed himself to be pulled closer, with the single finger in his shirt. "No, Will." He breathed against Will's face as the tips of their noses grazed. One fingertip dipped into the hollow of his throat. "Never again." The hand on his shirt balled into a fist as Will's hand tightened and yanked him even closer. You put me in prison, you dick!" He spat, nose to nose, as Hannibal felt the man's heartbeat jump. There was a pain through the clouds in Will's eyes that was sharper than a knife in his flesh. "Never again," he repeated. He wasn't a man of promises, but he did keep them. This promise to Will he intended to keep with every fiber of his being. Will's lips tightened as his fingers released Hannibal's shirt again. "You dick," he slurred drunkenly as Hannibal pushed back the curls from Will's forehead. "Never again, Will," he muttered, wishing he could take the entirety of the man and fold him onto his lap, to hold him. Will scoffed another "Fuck," and Hannibal's lips opened into a defeated smile. "For as long as you are willing to stay," he said, allowing Will's hands to reach for his face. "I want you here, with me." Searching fingers brushed his nose, his cheek, his eyebrows. Will watched him through hooded eyelids and his frown smoothed over. I want you." Sloppy, damp hands roamed up through Hannibal's hair, down his neck, his shoulders, his chest, before they shot up, rising to the ceiling. "Everywhere," Will suddenly whispered, eyes wide as he rounded his arms over his head before lowering them slowly. "Everywhere." Two hands framed Hannibal's face a little too harsh, and Hannibal could feel his cheeks, lips and skin puffed out under the pressure. Eyes fell to his mouth, resembling the shape of a fish. "You..." Will garbled, bringing his thumbs down to brush against Hannibal's opening lips. You wanna kiss me, you know." Hannibal's dark core had never felt stirring of something beyond his control. Until Will. In this moment, it was coiling, boiling, weeping under Will's touch, Will's stare. Yes, he admitted without a moment's hesitation. Yes, he wanted to kiss Will. A life spent near Will was enough to fill all of the voids. But a kiss, a connection of the heart, a romance that would bring him absolute paradise. "Kiss," Will suddenly snapped, pulling at Hannibal's head demandingly as his fingers curled behind his ears. "Kiss me." Pink lips pursed and blue eyes closed, noses brushed and foreheads touched, before Hannibal carefully detangled himself from the lure of Will's grip and the temptation of his pink, inviting, willing mouth. No, I cannot kiss you when you're not in the right mind to consent. He hushed against Will's chin with open, pained regret, despite my desire for your wrath tomorrow. Will sighed a chuckle against his temple. His lips were wet against Hannibal's skin. Tightening Hannibal's flesh to deep down his loins. You kiss me tomorrow. Hannibal smiled against the touch, baring sharp teeth before placing a small kiss at the tip of one quivering thumb. Ask me tomorrow, he spoke against the skin. Will breathed wetly from his throat as he frowned. You, he said, thumbs poking up Hannibal's lips until fangs were exposed. You ask me tomorrow. Hannibal enjoyed Will's exploration of his face and watched him through heavy lids as Will pushed and probed curiously against his skin. Will I? He hummed at the cloudy boy. Will nodded with a free fall of his hand. Mm-hmm, he said, squeezing the skin of Hannibal's cheeks into a sloppy pinch. Because you like me. Hannibal inhaled, deep and sharp as he looked into his unguarded hazy blue. I love you, he breathed, unafraid. It was a clear, clean, and untampered fact that he had not been frightened to reveal. Will looked at him, and Hannibal wondered with fiery curiosity what the man would remember when the drugs wore off. Arms folded around Hannibal's shoulders as Will pressed his cheeks together, bringing their bodies close in an awkward embrace. Don't go. He heard Will's plea against his nose, and he felt the hot streak of air against his skin. Never, he promised, for it was all in his heart. Never again. Pop. Will mumbled sleepily against him. Fed, washed, and freshly bandaged, Will was propped up on the corner of the sofa early next afternoon, and nodded gratefully when Hannibal handed him another cup of herbal tea. Careful to avoid Will's lifted, outstretched legs, Hannibal seated himself beside Will's shoulder as he pressed his lips together in a teasing smile. You asked me for a kiss. Blue eyes shot up with flustered stubbornness as Will pressed his mouth against the rim of the mug. Puh. He huffed against the glazed clay and rolled his eyes theatrically to the ceiling when Hannibal kept his gaze on him. I did no such thing. You did indeed. Hannibal countered daringly as he crossed his legs and leaned one arm on the back of the couch. After your surgery yesterday. Will blew on his tea, ears pink and piercing gaze unimpressed. Hannibal leaned back against the cushion. You also asked me to ask you for one today. He poked teasingly and watched how Will's ears shaded to red as he buried his face in his cup. But Hannibal caught the twitching lip and the snort echoing against the inside of the mug, stormy eyes peering back and folded. Maybe things aren't as complicated as you made them out to be, he hummed, dipping his toes in very dangerous waters he knew were not always as cold as they appeared, but surely hosted many sharp teeth. Will sighed, but warmed Hannibal's side when he leaned against him. What we have is beyond complication, Hannibal, he mumbled, his lashes fluttering again when Hannibal carted soft fingers across his skull. Not when your tongue is loosened by barbiturates, Hannibal mused, allowing himself the pleasure of Will's nearness and the weakening warmth that was wakened inside. Then you seem to know exactly what your desires are when regarding us. Will chuckled against Hannibal's side, his cup between both of his open hands. This, he nearly sighed as Hannibal dragged his light nails across his skin. You and me, stormy eyes flashed up to meet Hannibal, is the most fucked up thing that has ever existed in my entire fucked up life. His laughter was dry, but his eyes were swimming as he said, I don't even understand my own part in it, Hannibal. Will's spine crackled when he pushed himself upright, allowing Hannibal to take the cup from his hands and place it on the coffee table. We can't just forget about all of it, he said, hunching his shoulders, and looked at Hannibal through his unruly bangs. Just because you, he swallowed visibly, just because I want you to kiss me. Hannibal turned towards him, hand inching towards Will's on the couch. Can't we? He breathed, before their fingers brushed between their hips. He leaned in, nose brushing a soft curl. Because you told me that you want me, he whispered, and watched Will's eyes blink rapidly with words. Hannibal rose his hands over Will's head before rounding downward and finished with a drawn-out everywhere. Hannibal was roughly pushed back by strong hands, shoving hard against his chest as a flustered Will groaned in embarrassment. Shut up, he gasped, eyes wide before a startled chuckle pushed through his lips. Hands came up to cover his face. This is so fucking embarrassing. Blue eyes were bright but rimmed with a fiery shade of pink. I don't remember half the things I said, Will confessed, his voice turning into a whine. And the things I do remember. Hannibal laughed, hearty and true, brought his arms around Will to push them inside in a gesture of playful comfort. It was beautifully real, hearing you speak like that, he said, as Will's face buried against his neck. It's not fair, he complained with a muffle. I will never get to hear your drug-infested babbles. A poking nose inhaled against Hannibal's skin. Then maybe you wouldn't be so... Hannibal's tongue poked the inside of his cheek as he filled the sentence with a dragged out smug. Will snorted against his neck. That's a good word to describe you, he said, and Hannibal laughed as his hands ran up and down Will's back. Never before had Will allowed him to be this close, with such little tension in the wiry muscles. It was the word you used to describe me, he said. Will coughed, choking on the memory. You're awful, he complained, pushing fingers against Hannibal's chest. And a dick, apparently. Hannibal added cheerfully against Will's hair, whose laughter burst from deep within his chest. Jesus, Will moaned, pushing far back enough to look straight into Hannibal's twinkling eyes. Yeah, you laugh it up, he said, cheeks warm and lips full. You wouldn't be so confident if you were babbling straight from your unfiltered gut. So close together, Hannibal easily got lost in Will's headily scent, his warmth and solid weight against his bones. I still have a tooth that needs pulling, he said, before he had the chance to think it over. The molar in the right had been wobbling ever since the dragon had elbowed him square in his face. You never use anesthesia on yourself, Will said, raising a dark eyebrow, but Hannibal pushed his arms tighter around his waist, unwilling to let the other man go. Well, he said, feeling giddy from the smile on Will's pink lips, if it evens the score. Will watched the sleeping man on his bed with great annoyance. Hannibal had pulled the cracked molar, took the drugs as promised, and quickly fallen into slumber. That was 2 hours ago. Lying on the bed beside him, Will pulled a face as he watched Hannibal sleep, wondering if he was going to wake up all before the stuff wore off completely. Come on, he groaned, jostling Hannibal's arms with his hand. You're not getting off this easy, old man. A decent 15 minutes later, Hannibal finally began to stir. Will, he slurred as he turned and spotted Will beside him. His honey eyes were a deep swirl as he rode lazily onto his belly. The man was rosy with sleep, golden with ease, and still every inch as elegant as Will knew him to be. He watched how the gold and silver hair stuck at the back, and reached to smooth over it with his fingers. Lips opened in a smile, showing a deep, dark red. Lay back, Will said, trying to push Hannibal back on the pillow. You still have blood in your mouth. Water. He needed to get him some water. Will slid off the bed, supporting himself with his only right leg as he stumbled to the sink. Will. Hannibal whined after him, and Will bit the urge to chuckle at the desperate call that followed him from behind. as put together and controlled he knew the man could be, as unwound and undignified as he sounded now. "I'm coming," he assured him, as he held a glass under the tap to fill it halfway with water. Hannibal kept a high whine in his throat, and Will dragged himself back as quickly as he could. I'm here," he shushed as he seated himself on the edge of Hannibal's side on the bed. "Drink this." Hannibal lifted the glass to his lips and tilted it for a drink, before the water ran down from both sides of his mouth down to the chin and on the cover of the bed. "Oh, Jesus, sorry," Will said as he snatched the glass back. "I forgot you couldn't feel anything." He quickly dabbed Hannibal's mouth with the hem of his shirt, and the man looked at him, dazed and confused. I feel things," he said, as he blinked his pretty lashes up at Will. "I feel all the things." Will smiled and cleaned him up, and brushed Hannibal's temple as he settled back against the bedrest. "You took a lot of drugs, didn't you?" he asked, shaking his head and patted against Hannibal's sleek hair. "Much more than you needed." Hannibal closed his eyes. "Mm-hmm. 'Twas for Will." He placed a lazy finger against his lips, as if to indicate the words were a secret. Will only felt his insides waver with a thick stroke of affection. Damn him. "You'll be okay," he comforted, continuously stroking the silver and gold hair beneath his fingers. Hannibal looked up at him through half-lids. You're magnificent," he said with a dramatic, adoring sigh that made Will smile and wince in a single breath. "You would know," he tried to tease as he stared at Hannibal's doughy gaze. You stare at me a lot." Hannibal hummed again as he tried to grasp Will's hand in his, and when he succeeded, he placed his cheek against Will's palm and inhaled. I, 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 I try not to tempt myself," he spoke guiltily. But I look." Will's smile burst from beneath his teeth as he tried to suppress a chuckle. "I know you do," he cooed as he had been rubbing his hands along Hannibal's stubble. "I've been looking at you too, you know." His confession was so easily made, with Hannibal so dazed, so vulnerable and small, otherwise Will would have never. Well, maybe. Things have been different lately. Hannibal's eyes widened and fingers swayed searchingly before he pressed to Will's lips and whispered, I saw you without clothing." A snort burst from Will's nostrils this time as he smiled openly against the finger. Hannibal had operated on him, had bathed him, had redressed him. It was far to say modesty hadn't had a place between them. "Trust me, I know. You've seen me, and I've seen you." Hannibal stared at him, his eyes briefly crossing on the tips of his nose, before eyes widened comically. "Yeah?" His breath smelled of copper, and Will bit his lip as he cupped Hannibal's chin lightly in his hand. "Yes," he said, rubbing a thumb across the man's rough cheek. "And you know you're handsome." Hannibal smiled like a content cat as he closed his eyes and rested the weight of his head in Will's hand. I am," he sighed, before he leaned himself back against the pillow, opened his tired eyes, and brought his fingers to run down Will's chest. "But you," he spoke dreamily, "are an absolute angel." Fingers pulled aimlessly at Will's shirt as Hannibal rolled his head to his side. "A paragon of beauty." Will huffed as he let himself be pulled closer. He was deeply familiar with Hannibal's theatrics, but to hear these terms of endearment and admiration fall from the drunken tongue was tickling something within him. He snorted when Hannibal accidentally headbutted him as he tried to bring him closer, and jolted when Hannibal's hand suddenly pressed against his belly. You have the most beautiful scar. He smiled, pulling Will's shirt out of his sweats. Here it is. Will allowed the touch along the smile on his stomach, deep and wide, but not deep and wide enough to have killed him, exactly the amount he could afford. Thanks, he said, pulling back to sit back up on the bed and look down at Hannibal's drowsy fingers on his skin. He was warm and gentle, and felt Will's adoration through the damaged flesh. It's yours. Hannibal's hand pulled away from his skin as drunk eyes instantly drew to the ceiling. Yes, he breathed, an endless stare taking over the features as if a white plaster suddenly held something that enchanted or frightened him. Yes, You hurt me, Will finished for him as he placed his hands on his own thighs. Yes, you did. Hannibal's eyes shifted to the ceiling, restless movements left to right. To Will's surprise, or maybe even absolute shock, tears suddenly welled in Hannibal's honey gaze as he traveled along the walls and roof. Hannibal? He reached, finding Hannibal's hand on the sheets. The man didn't look at him as he murmured, I didn't realize that He struggled with the words, but he seemed to be unaware. I didn't want to hurt. Will heard Hannibal's throat close in a choke and rubbed his thumb along the back of his hand. He watched a fat tear fall from eye to ear. You didn't realize that you don't want to hurt Will? He asked, his voice low, fragile whisper, as it sprung from the most vulnerable place in his ribs. No, Hannibal said, pressing his lips together. His head shook lightly on the pillow. Another tear slipped through. I didn't like it. Will caught the tear with his thumb. No, he swallowed, as he watched the drop bounce on his skin before it dripped down the side of his hand. Don't hurt Will. He stood to once again shuffle around the bed and hoist himself onto the other side. No. Hannibal repeated beside him, eyes still on the ceiling, as if watching all the answers sway above his head. I love Will. Finally, the gaze lowered and Hannibal's head turned onto the pillow. Honey eyes hit Will, straight, wet, and steadier than Will had expected. I love Will, he said, dead earnest with a swirl around his head as he watched him through wet lashes. Will felt his stomach clench hot and cold again, as he shuffled on the bed, bringing himself closer. I know, he breathed. I know. He folded himself around the other man and shaped himself against Hannibal's side. Lay here with me. Hannibal obeyed, curling himself on the other side as he pressed his nose into Will's shoulder. The bullet scar grazed the tip. I love you, Hannibal said, and Will felt his lips smooth over skin with the words. Looking down, Will saw those honey-brown eyes looking straight up at him, rimmed pink, wet, and hazy. And Will started, feeling warm and tight in his chest. A newfound courage bubbled up from his heart, from his mouth. But only halfway in, it was Hannibal's swatting that stopped him. No, he demanded, eyes still big and wide on Will as he slid himself a little higher on the bed. Lips suddenly brushed along the curve of Will's shoulder until they aligned with his ear. Listen to me. Will almost snorted at the stubborn man, missing out on his confession, but nodded when Hannibal started fidgeting with the short sleeve of his shirt and pressing his lips together in earnest. This love is far beyond the physical, Will. Far beyond the physical. Will leaned back against the headboard and carted his hands through Hannibal's messy hair. You don't want it to be physical? He asked him. Hannibal's eyes widened as if suddenly horrified by the images those words had brought behind his eyes. so much. Yes. He breathed, forcing eye contact with his drunken vision. Hands opened and reached slowly towards the ceiling. So much. Will's eyes lowered to his own stroking hands as he tried to suppress the warm, tingling smile that grew from the sparks he felt bursting inside. Hannibal's voice was a whisper. But it's beyond. Hands grasped at the shirt at Will's belly and chest, like a clinging monkey grasping for its mother. And Hannibal dazed, sleepy features came into Will's vision as he tried to climb on top of him. Reaching. We have time, Will. I have time. He spoke in earnest, and Will saw the dark red in his mouth rimming his teeth. Even if it's all the time. And Will understood the message. He brushed a hand from Hannibal's forehead down to his neck. He understood. Hannibal dared to tell him now that all he wanted was Will, as a lover, as a friend, as a partner, as a brother. However he could have him, it would be enough. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't impatient or expecting anything. Hannibal wanted Will as a partner in crime, a life companion, a husband, and a soulmate. But he would be satisfied living as little as friendly neighbors, should that all Will were willing to give. What that all came down to was the next sentence, uttered with naked fragility. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Don't run. You make the rules as long as you stay. Will pulled the man over him until he was lying completely on top. He guided Hannibal's tired head down to his neck and brought his own arms beneath Hannibal's armpits to link his fingers on his back. He wondered if Hannibal would ever have dared to vocalize this fear without the drugs, if he would ever realize how deeply it was rooted, how far beyond his own pride. No, he said, enjoying the weight of Hannibal's body pressing close. Don't go back to your stupid wife, Hannibal pleaded, hot against Will's collarbone, and they both shook when Will laughed silently within his chest. She's not, he tried, before huffing hot air from his nostrils. No, I won't, he promised. This time it was Hannibal who made both of them shake, when a bubble of giggles burst from his belly. Your stupid wife, he repeated against Will's skin, and his shoulders shook with laughter. Will smiled, closed his eyes against the warmth and weight of their embrace, and knew they were going to fall asleep just like this. Hannibal had slept for 14 hours after that, and Will was just finishing his daily ankle exercises when he heard the shower run. He made a fresh round of coffee that was pouring into cups just as Hannibal walked into the kitchen, wearing a bathrobe, silk pajama pants, and slippers. Will couldn't stop himself from smiling when he walked in and took the offered cup with clear but pink eyes. How do you feel? He asked as he watched a forgotten droplet roll down Hannibal's throat. Hannibal's tongue swiped across the inside of his mouth behind closed, contemplating lips. Asymmetrical, he decided, and Will exhaled into his coffee. And your head? He poked, as a smirk pulled over the rim of his cup. Hannibal rose 2 ash-blonde eyebrows, but smiled at him nonetheless. Clear, he drawled. Did you have fun in my vulnerable state? Will laughed a real laugh, a cackle that sounded foreign from his own throat. I think we both did, before reaching out and slipping an arm around Hannibal's waist. We had a little heart-to-heart. Hannibal's surprised delight was open on his face, and his features melted with tenderness as he slid down his arm around Will's shoulder. I must admit, it's a bit of a blur to me, he confessed, the memories that lay tainted and far inside his mind. Will's lips pulled together as he bit down on the lower. Well,
he mused, putting his coffee cup on the counter without stepping out of their half-embrace. I suppose I could fill you in. Hannibal chuckled at Will's bemused tone. Enlighten me, he said, following Will's example by putting away his coffee cup, still filled to the brim. Will folded his free hand around Hannibal's side, holding him in his arms as he eyed him with a sharp slice of joy. You told me that you love me. Hannibal brought his own arms loosely around Will. I do, he said, without a blink of those warm honey eyes. Will ran a tongue over his teeth. And that you saw me naked, he continued, a light chuckle in his tone that Hannibal mirrored in reply. I did. Will's lips tilted into a crooked smile as he leaned down into Hannibal's ear. He brought his voice down to a whisper and said, that you looked. Hannibal's chest brushed his, and the heat of his skin seeped into Will as they leaned closer together. Well, was Hannibal's only offer, as sharp teeth shone in the warm kitchen light. Will licked his lips, leaning back enough to look up at Hannibal's face, tightened with amusement and pleasure. You also said that your love for me was beyond the physical, he said, adding the same magician's quality to the words that Hannibal had. Beyond. And Hannibal's shoulders shifted with vibration as he tightened his hands on Will's smaller back. It is. Will tilted his head, feeling the minty breath brush his cheeks as they fitted together closer. But that you would like it to be. Hannibal's eyes fell to his lips. I do. So much, Will whispered against him, through a toothy smile that opened both of their faces. Hannibal's lips hovered over Will's. No truer words. The kiss was gentle. A soft slide of their lips, a sweet introduction of their mouths, dancing around the question of permission. The pressure of their skin was barely present, but their lips slid wetly and sweet together with the building heat. It was brief. Too brief. But their separation didn't last, because when their eyes met again, they were blazed open with desire. A confirmation for and by both that this was the path they were choosing. Will closed the distance the second time, and it was only after another moment of tenderness that Will's tongue came to taste along the lips with a needful groan of desire buried deep long within inside himself. A desire for Hannibal that he had denied them both. Hannibal's hands wrung into Will's shirt as he opened his mouth to meet his need for more. They melted against each other with fluttering eyes as Hannibal pressed their mouths together in a deep, heated kiss. Shared bones rolled from one tongue to the other as Hannibal licked gently along Will's lower lip and slid them together. Smooth and easy, they pulled softly and tugged carefully, coaxing and nudging and silently begging against the other's skin. Hannibal's tongue brushed against Will's lips, before slipping into the wet heat of his mouth and greeted him with a gentle, daring stroke against his teeth. Will moaned deeply into him, and the pleasure in the kiss that sparked deep inside his belly. He held on to the other man's shoulders to prevent himself from losing his balance as he met the gentle persuasion by licking wholly against the roof of Hannibal's mouth. When they pulled apart, their hands still clung to the other, their skin and lips flushed red. Their breath was caught high in their chests, and it took a shattered moment before they could find the calm to speak. Their eyes were black and bright. Will nuzzled against Hannibal's warm cheek. You also said that I couldn't go back to my stupid wife. He chuckled with a tremble against Hannibal's skin. Hannibal's amusement hummed against his ear. You can't, he confirmed all too happily. You can't go back to your stupid wife. And Will laughed into his neck with hot, wet relief. Hannibal's chest vibrated against his as he tightened his arms, closing them into a whole embrace. Dick. And they could only move forward from here on out, Will decided. He was anxious but bubbling in anticipation as he sat on the bed, waiting for Hannibal's return from the bathroom. He wanted to move forward, to a place beyond anything they had shared or lived, to a place beyond anything either of them had ever experienced. And it was terrifying as well as glorious. He was choosing Hannibal, all of him, without restraint. Finally, Will was leaning against the bedrest with one hand behind his head when Hannibal entered the room, unpresumptuously wearing his usual silk pajamas and rubbing his wet hair dry with a towel. Bare feet patted on the parquet. "You," Will slurred. He pointed a purposefully unsteady finger at Hannibal. "Come here, you." The other man looked up in surprise at Will's unexpected tone and paused the towel against the side of his head mid-drawing. He made a show of turning his head over his shoulder and pointing at his own chest with the innocent fluttering of lashes. "Me?" Will's flat hands slapped down on the bed. "Yeah, you smug son of a bitch. Come here." He grinned openly when Hannibal blinked, dropped the towel to the floor, and smiled, his teeth bare, as he approached the bed. Come here," Will breathed, lying himself down on the bed when the man climbed onto the mattress and slowly tigered over to him to align their bodies. Hannibal dipped his head to capture Will's smiling lips into a kiss. Soft and deep all at once, their tongues slid together as legs fitted between the others. "Here?" he asked against Will's mouth, who bit down punishingly on the other's lower lip. "Close enough," he huffed before Hannibal felt greedy hands in his damp hair as he leaned on his elbow above Will's shoulders, supporting his head with two cupping hands. Their chests breathed against each other, pushing them up and down, and their hips and groins met before the layers of their thin pajamas and undergarments. Will surrendered to the feeling of their touching skin and conquering mouths, but the tension he felt back in the back of Hannibal's neck betrayed the restraint. The man was holding back, afraid to cross an unspoken, invisible boundary, to lose him again. But Will was all in. Will was all the way in. "More," he moaned against Hannibal's lips, and watched as his body sang and burned under his touch. He had always wanted, desired this, but he had never been brave enough, honest enough. But there was no way he was ever going back to being blind after the shells had fallen away. Hannibal pulled back, his chest flushed and pink beneath the buttons and his swollen lips glistening wet. "More?" he asked, nearly shy, as he searched Will's eyes with blazing thick honey. "More." Will spoke with the air alone, as he arched his pelvis up to show his desire and brought his hand down to the hem of Hannibal's shirt. Hannibal's lower half pressed it back against his, obviously aroused and willing. "How much more?" he mouthed against Will's neck as he kissed a wet trail down, and Will hissed when teeth grazed over his artery. "As much as you're willing to give," he swallowed, fumbling with the buttons of Hannibal's pajamas. Buttons on pajamas were now more ridiculous than ever. "I'm still not very mobile." Hannibal laughed up against his neck, making Will shiver with the sharp, hot air that seeped straight into his bones. "You might regret those words," he said, pushing his own hands under Will's shirt to slide them over the trembling muscles. "I'm most willing to give you everything I have." And Will had no reason to doubt him, because Hannibal had never moved half-heartedly. He was a man of no less than it all, and Will had known that on the cliff, as he knew it now. So give it. And Hannibal did. Will was undressed along the journey of worship on his skin. Hannibal sucked bruises and bit marks on his flesh as he hungrily moved a path from Will's throat, arms, wrists, fingers, his chest, nipples, pits, and ribs, his stomach, belly button, abdomen, and hips, all the way down to his crotch. Will was hot, hard, and leaky when Hannibal sank his mouth over him, to the point it took maddening restraint to not lose himself in the velvet but dangerous heat that was Hannibal. Long, slick fingers opened Will's body, who watched in awe as Hannibal experienced him felt, scented, absorbed him, as if frightened it would be the last and only time. But it wouldn't be. Will didn't know where to look, how to move, or maintain any dignity with the noises he was making when Hannibal rubbed his prostate with unfair precision and massaged the tight ring of muscles with his flattened tongue. He could only bite down on his fist, and he desperately tried to keep in mind that he was not allowed to move his damaged ankle. Hannibal, please, he begged when he couldn't take a moment longer, even if he desperately wanted to. Hannibal shed his clothes as Will clawed at the offensive fabric before their naked skin touching along the entire length of their bodies. A deep groan, a purr of true satisfaction, penetrated Will's ear with the heat and desire that made him lift his good leg over Hannibal's back until his curled toes found the round curve of Hannibal's ass. When they connected, and Hannibal slid inside him with a forced patience that caused them both to pant and growl, Will felt his body fold around him with a stretch and burn that caused him to curse, to shudder, and to push down for more. He was so full, stretched so wide, when Hannibal pulled back, pushed in, and found a rhythm that was deep but slow, hard but gentle, and brought them both on the verge of laughter, tears, and eruption. Will clung to him, kissing wherever he could reach and holding on to whatever he could grasp as Hannibal breathed, quivered, and groaned in a way that Will had never seen him break. He heard his own name on every breath and felt himself opening as they moved, rolled, danced, lost in each other in the waves of the storm. Hannibal had wanted this from the start. He had wanted this. Hannibal had known how good, how seamless it would be between them. Will had struggled to understand before, both the union of their minds and their flesh, but at last he understood, because Jesus Christ, it had never been this good. Hannibal's hand stroked up around Will's shaft as he fucked into his tight, slick hole with his slick, pulsing cock until Will was about to go officially cross-eyed. His nails dragged over Hannibal's shoulder as he brought him in for open kisses in his panting lips. He was so close. He could already see the light behind the gate. Hannibal, please, I need you so much, Will sobbed, arching his spine when Hannibal angled hard on his prostate while rubbing his fingers right beneath the spot on the head of Will's cock. Hannibal inhaled sharply through the nostrils that he nuzzled beneath Will's ear. So much? He hummed teasingly against the shell, just as a weakened burst of laughter bubbled from Will's lips. Hannibal's hand tightened on the length of his overstimulated erection. His body spilled hot drops of sticky semen onto his own belly, and his giggle became a wail that he shook and spasmed beneath Hannibal with his nails digging hard into the man's back. It was blinding, squeezing, absolute sharp, cruel pleasure as Hannibal fucked him through it and allowed Will's body to squeeze his own orgasm from him as he looked at Will with eyes of coal and rode the waves of his climax with facial expressions and sobbing grunts that would be the closest thing to resemble pain Will had ever seen in him. But it wasn't pain, because nearly the endless sigh of pure happiness that followed when Hannibal's body pressed up against him was a sign most clear. Careful not to hurt Will's ankle, Hannibal fitted himself against the other side, slinging one arm over Will's waist to cuddle closer. He hummed as he grazed his nose along Will's neck. And to think, you didn't even like me. Will laughed, he feeling Hannibal's soft, warm belly press against his hip. I'm not supposed to, he teased, turning his head to murmur the words against Hannibal's smiling mouth. But I do. A light kiss pressed to Hannibal's lips. And if you find the patience to let me finish a sentence a second time, I'll tell you what else I'm not supposed to do. Will continued, watching Hannibal's eyes swim, wet with the gentle light of their bedroom. Honey eyes were wide in anticipation before Will cupped his face with his hands and pressed the skin together with enough force to puff out Hannibal's cheeks, chin, and lips. I love you. The end.